Blinding snow and bitter betrayal defined the Wyoming winter of 1883. Up in the treacherous Wind River Pass, freezing to death was almost a guarantee. But fate has a strange way of intervening. Sometimes it takes a ruthless blizzard and a lone, scarred rider to finally melt a hardened heart. The wind did not merely blow through the jagged teeth of the Wind River Mountains. It screamed. It was a vicious, living entity that clawed at the exposed skin, seeking to turn warm blood into brittle ice. In the heart of this howling white void, Kaya huddled against the rocky overhang, her body trembling so violently it felt as though her bones might shatter. Around her were 3 Appaloosa fillies, their usually striking coats of roan and white spots now plastered with a thick, freezing layer of snow. They were yearlings, barely old enough to be separated from their mothers. Yet here they were, stranded at an elevation of 8,000 feet in the worst blizzard the Wyoming Territory had seen in a decade. The fillies pressed their flanks together, their heads drooping low, their warm breath pluming into the frigid air only to instantly crystallize. Kaya wrapped her frozen, cracked hands deeper into the woolen blanket that offered little defense against the biting cold. She was Shoshone by blood, but she had lived the last 10 years caught between 2 worlds, working on the sprawling ranches in the valleys below. She knew these mountains. She knew their beauty, and she knew their cruelty, but she had never intended to be caught in their icy grip in the dead of winter. She hadn't been lost. She had been left. The memory of the betrayal burned hotter than the frostbite gnawing at her toes. Just 2 days prior, she had been hired to transport these 3 prize fillies, the last pure descendants of a legendary tribal bloodline, down to a buyer in Lander. Her escort was a hardened ranch hand named Levi Bronson, a man with a crooked smile and eyes that never quite met hers. She should have known better than to trust a man on the payroll of Josiah Cutler. Cutler was a ruthless cattle baron out of Casper, a man who believed that whatever his money couldn't buy, his men could take by force. Cutler had coveted the Appaloosas for years, furious that a young native woman possessed a breed of horses superior to his own expensive thoroughbreds. When the first flakes of the storm had begun to fall, Levi had drawn his Colt revolver. There was no hesitation, no remorse. He had ordered her off her horse, took the reins of her pack mule, and told her to walk into the snow. Cutler sends his regards. Kaya. Levi had sneered, spitting a stream of tobacco into the rising drifts. He figures the mountain will do the dirty work for him and keep his hands clean of your blood. Levi had intended to take the fillies, but the young horses, loyal to Kaya since they were foaled, panicked at the gunshot Levi fired to scare her off. They had bolted into the treacherous timberline, scattering into the storm. Levi, unwilling to risk his own life chasing them in the impending blizzard, had cursed, turned his horse around, and descended toward the warmth of the valley, leaving Kaya for dead. It had taken her hours of wading through waist-deep snow, calling out with a throat raw from the cold to gather the 3 terrified fillies. By the time she had found the last one, the blizzard had hit with full, blinding force. Now, trapped under a shallow limestone overhang, she knew the end was near. The fillies were succumbing to the cold. Soon, their legs would give out, and they would lie down in the snow, never to rise again. Kaya closed her eyes, praying to the spirits of her ancestors, asking not for her own life, but for the lives of the innocent animals shivering beside her. Then she heard it. It was faint at first, easily mistaken for the groaning of the frozen pines. But the sound came again, the heavy, rhythmic crunch of hooves breaking through crusted snow. Kaya's eyes snapped open. Her hand instinctively went to the bone-handled hunting knife she kept sheathed at her waist. Through the swirling vortex of white, a massive silhouette began to materialize. For a terrifying second, she thought Levi Bronson had returned to finish the job. She braced herself, ready to fight, ready to die with her boots in the snow. But as the figure breached the wall of the storm, she saw it wasn't Levi. It was a lone cowboy sitting astride a mammoth coal-black horse, a beast so large it looked like it was bred from the mountain rock itself. The rider was wrapped in a thick buffalo hide coat, his hat pulled low, a woolen scarf obscuring his face. Only his eyes were visible sharp, piercing, and taking in the scene with calculating speed. The black horse snorted, stomping a hoof that sent a spray of ice into the air. The cowboy pulled back on the reins, halting a mere 10 yards from the overhang. For a long moment, there was nothing but the sound of the wind. The man looked at the 3 freezing fillies, then down at the young woman clutching a knife with trembling hands, slowly, deliberately, to show he meant no harm. The cowboy raised his gloved hands. He swung his leg over the saddle and dropped into the deep snow with a heavy thud. He didn't speak. Instead, he turned to his saddlebags, unbuckled a heavy leather strap, and pulled out a tightly rolled canvas tarp and a bundle of dry, resin-soaked pine kindling. He waded through the snow toward the overhang. Kaya shrank back, her knife still raised, the blade shaking like a leaf. "Put it away," the man said. His voice was a low, gravelly baritone, rough as sandpaper but surprisingly steady against the howling wind. "Unless you're planning on using that to start a fire, it ain't going to do you any good against the cold." Kaya didn't lower the blade. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice cracking. "Are you one of Cutler's men?" The cowboy stopped, his eyes narrowing slightly beneath the brim of his snow-caked hat. "If I was riding for Josiah Cutler, you'd already be dead, and those horses would be on a train to Casper." He took another step forward, dropping the wood onto the dry stone beneath the overhang. "Name's Gideon Hayes, and right now, we have about 20 minutes before those fillies freeze to death, and you follow them shortly after. So, you can stab me, or you can help me build this fire. Your choice." Kaya stared into the stranger's eyes. They were a startling, icy blue, weathered by sun and sorrow. But they held no malice. Exhaustion finally overtook her fear. She lowered the knife, her arm dropping to her side like a lead weight. Gideon didn't waste another second. He moved with a practiced, brutal efficiency. Within minutes, Gideon had constructed a windbreak using the heavy canvas tarp, securing it between the rock wall and the thick trunk of a dead cedar tree. It blocked the worst of the howling gale, creating a small, sheltered pocket of still air. He struck a lucifer match against his boot, touched it to the resin-soaked kindling, and soon a small, brilliant orange flame was licking at the dry wood. The sudden warmth was almost painful. Kaya gasped as the heat hit her frost-bitten skin, 1,000 needles prickling her face and hands. Gideon ignored her, moving to the black horse, which he called Goliath, and pulling down a heavy sack of oats. He divided it among the 3 fillies, murmuring softly to them in a tone completely different from the rough voice he used with her. He rubbed their freezing ears, brushed the ice from their coats, and guided them closer to the radiating heat of the fire. Only when the horses were settled did Gideon turn his attention back to Kaya. He pulled a battered tin flask from his coat pocket and tossed it to her. "Drink," he ordered. It'll burn, but it'll get your blood moving. Kaya caught the flask with numb fingers. She unscrewed the cap and took a small sip. It was harsh, unaged rye whiskey, and it hit her stomach like a swallowed coal, sending a necessary shock of warmth through her freezing veins. She coughed, handing it back. "Thank you," she managed to say, her voice barely more than a whisper. Gideon took the flask, took a swig himself, and sat down on a flat rock across the fire from her. He pushed his hat back, revealing a face deeply lined by the harsh elements of the West, a jagged scar running along his jawline. He looked her over, his gaze analytical. What's a girl doing out in the Devil's Wash Bowl in the middle of a winter squall with 3 unregistered Appaloosas? He asked, prodding the fire with a stick. Kaya bristled. "They aren't unregistered. They belonged to my grandfather. They belong to me." "That ain't what the paper says," Gideon replied smoothly, his tone conversational, but laced with an underlying tension. Kaya froze. The warmth of the fire suddenly vanished, replaced by a cold dread in the pit of her stomach. "What paper?" Gideon reached into the inside pocket of his thick buffalo coat. He pulled out a folded, slightly damp piece of heavy stock paper. He flicked it open with one hand and held it up in the firelight. It was a bounty poster. Even from across the flames, Kaya could see the crude charcoal sketch of her own face. The bold, black letters at the top screamed, "Wanted. $500. Reward." Beneath it, the charges were listed: grand larceny, horse thievery, attempted murder of Levi Bronson. "Josiah Cutler issued this 3 days ago out of the sheriff's office in Lander," Gideon said, his eyes never leaving hers. "Said a wild Shoshone girl went crazy, shot his foreman, and stole his prized breeding stock. $500 is a lot of money. Kaya. More money than most men see in 5 years." Kaya stared at the paper, her breath hitching. The twist of the knife was complete. He wasn't a savior passing through. He was a hunter. He was a bounty man, tracking her through the blizzard for a paycheck. Her hand slowly inched toward the knife she had set beside her. "Don't do it," Gideon said softly, though he didn't move to draw his own weapon. "You're half frozen. I'd disarm you before the blade cleared the scabbard, and then we'd both be upset." "You're a tracker," she spat, the venom returning to her voice. "A bounty hunter working for a thief." "I work for myself," Gideon corrected, folding the poster and tucking it back into his coat. "I'm a man who finds things that are lost. Cutler hired me because he knows I don't lose a trail, not even in a blizzard. So, what now?" Kaya demanded, lifting her chin defiantly. She refused to let him see her cry. "You tie me up, drag me down the mountain so Cutler can hang me in a kangaroo court." Gideon looked at her, then looked at the 3 fillies. The young horses were finally stopping their shivering, chewing contentedly on the oats. He sighed, rubbing a tired hand over his scarred jaw. "I've been tracking you since you left Lander," Gideon said, his voice dropping lower. "I found the spot where you were ambushed. I saw the boot prints in the snow. I saw where Levi Bronson stood, and I saw where you fell. I also saw the tracks of his horse heading back down the mountain, while your tracks, and the fillies, headed up into the storm." He looked back at her, the dancing firelight reflecting in his icy eyes. Now, a man who just had his horses stolen and got shot at doesn't usually ride away from the thief, and a girl who just stole 3 horses doesn't herd them into a deadly blizzard unless she's running for her life. Furthermore, Gideon gestured to the fillies, anyone with half a brain can see those horses trust you. They wouldn't let a stranger herd them through this hell. Kaya listened, her heart pounding against her ribs. You don't believe the poster. I've known Josiah Cutler since my days in the Pinkerton Agency, Gideon said, a dark shadow crossing his face. Cutler is a snake in a silk suit. He buys land by poisoning wells, and he takes livestock by buying the law. If he put a bounty on your head, it's because it was cheaper than buying those horses fair and square. Kaya let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. The tension in the small, fire-lit cave shifted. It wasn't the relief of complete safety, but it was the realization that the man sitting across from her was not a blind instrument of Cutler's greed. He was a man with a code. My grandfather bred these horses, Kaya said softly, staring into the flames. Their lineage goes back to the days before the white settlers crossed the plains. Cutler found out about them. He offered me $50 for the 3 of them. When I laughed in his face, he went to the judge in Casper, forged a deed saying my father owed him a debt before he died and that the horses were collateral. Gideon nodded slowly. Standard Cutler playbook. So, you ran. I was trying to get them to the Shoshone reservation up north. My uncle is there. Cutler's men have no jurisdiction on tribal land. But Levi was supposed to be a friend. He sold me out for Cutler's silver. Gideon stood up, walking over to his horse. Goliath. He pulled a heavy Winchester rifle from the scabbard and checked the lever action. The metallic clack-clack echoed sharply against the stone. Well, Gideon said, turning back to the storm raging outside the canvas tarp, you're not going to make it to the reservation tonight. And unfortunately, Levi Bronson didn't just ride home to sit by the fire. Kaya frowned, standing up quickly, her frozen joints protesting. What do you mean? Gideon pointed out into the swirling white darkness. When I was tracking you, I wasn't the only one on the trail. Cutler doesn't trust bounty hunters. He sent a posse behind me to make sure the job got done. 4 men, led by a ruthless piece of work named Bill Red Higgins. Kaya's blood ran cold. Higgins was Cutler's chief enforcer, a man known for leaving no witnesses. They were about 3 miles back. Gideon continued, his eyes scanning the tree line. The storm slowed them down, but they have tracking hounds. They'll smell this wood smoke eventually. He turned to look at Kaya, the flickering fire casting long, dancing shadows across his scarred face. He held out his hand. So, Kaya, it looks like you have a choice to make. You can stay here and try to fight off 4 armed men with a hunting knife, or you can trust the bounty hunter who was hired to bring you in. Kaya looked at the outstretched hand, large, calloused, and steady. She looked at the 3 fillies, finally warm and safe, and then out into the brutal, unforgiving blizzard where death was actively hunting them. She reached out and firmly gripped Gideon's hand. The uneasy truce between Kaya and Gideon was sealed not with words, but with the grim preparation for a fight. The wind had begun to lose its screaming edge, settling into a low, mournful moan through the canyons. But the drop in the wind brought a terrifying clarity to the night air. Over the crackle of their small fire, the distant, unmistakable baying of tracking hounds echoed off the limestone walls. "They're close," Gideon muttered, kicking snow over the fire to douse the flames. Instant darkness enveloped them, save for the faint, ghostly illumination of the moon reflecting off the snowdrifts. The sudden cold was immediate and punishing. "Take the fillies deeper into the crevice," Gideon ordered, pulling his Winchester from its scabbard and checking the chamber by touch. "Keep them quiet. If things go bad out here, you get on that black horse of mine, and you ride north. Goliath knows the way to the trading post at Fort Washakie. He won't let you fall. I'm not leaving you to fight my battles. Gideon, Kaya whispered fiercely. She drew her bone-handled knife, the blade catching a sliver of moonlight. Levi Bronson is my responsibility. He betrayed me. Gideon paused, his large silhouette looming in the dark. He reached out, his gloved hand gently wrapping around hers, lowering the knife. It was the first time he had touched her with anything resembling tenderness. A knife against a repeating rifle is a quick way to a shallow grave. Kaya, you survive. That's how you win. Now get back. Kaya reluctantly guided the 3 shivering Appaloosas into the narrowest part of the rock overhang, her heart hammering against her ribs. She watched Gideon move with terrifying stealth, positioning himself behind the thick trunk of the dead cedar tree, his rifle resting on a low branch. Minutes stretched into an agonizing eternity. The baying of the hounds grew louder, frenzied, until suddenly it stopped. A sharp whistle pierced the frigid air. Spread out, a harsh voice barked from the tree line. It was Red Higgins. The dogs lost the scent in the drift, but I smell cordite and wood smoke. They're holed up in these rocks. Bronson, take the left flank. Kaya's breath caught in her throat. Levi had come back. He hadn't just abandoned her. He had led Cutler's executioners right to her. 4 shadows detached themselves from the dense pine forest, wading through the knee-deep snow. They were moving tactically, rifles raised. Last chance. Hayes, Red Higgins called out, his voice echoing. Cutler said you might turn yellow on this job. Toss the girl and the horses out, and we'll let you ride back to Casper with your life. Gideon didn't answer with words. He answered with the deafening roar of his Winchester. The muzzle flash illuminated the snow in a strobe of yellow light. The man to Higgins' right cried out, clutching his leg, and pitched forward into the snowdrift. Before the echo could fade, Gideon levered another round and fired, forcing Higgins to dive behind a granite boulder. The canyon erupted in a chaotic exchange of gunfire. Bullets whined and ricocheted off the limestone overhang above Kaya's head, raining sharp shards of rock and ice down upon her and the panicked Fillies. She desperately tried to calm them, murmuring Shoshone words of comfort into their manes. Through the chaos, Kaya tracked the movement of the shadows. Higgins and another man were keeping Gideon pinned down with heavy fire from the front, but Levi Bronson was circling around the side, climbing the sloping snowbank to get an angle above the overhang. He was going to flank Gideon. Kaya knew Gideon couldn't see him. If Levi reached the top of the ridge, he would have a clear shot at Gideon's back. She didn't think. She reacted. Slipping out from the sheltered crevice, Kaya moved with the silent grace of her ancestors. She kept low, crawling on her belly through the freezing powder, ignoring the burning cold that soaked through her clothes. She flanked Levi's flank. Levi was entirely focused on Gideon's position below him. He knelt in the snow, raising his rifle, aligning the sights on the back of Gideon's heavy buffalo coat. Levi. Kaya screamed. Bronson flinched, startled by the sound of his name coming from the darkness to his right. He swung his rifle toward her, but his footing on the icy slope was precarious. In that split second of hesitation, Kaya hurled a heavy, jagged piece of limestone she had grabbed from the cave floor. It struck Levi square in the shoulder. He yelped, losing his balance and tumbling backward down the steep, snowy embankment. His rifle discharged uselessly into the sky as he slid down right into the open. Gideon heard the commotion, spun, and fired. The bullet kicked up snow inches from Levi's head, freezing the man in terror, but taking his eyes off Higgins was a mistake. A shot rang out from the granite boulder. Gideon grunted a harsh, breathless sound and stumbled backward against the cedar tree. His rifle slipped from his hands, falling into the deep snow. "Gideon!" Kaya screamed, scrambling down the slope. "Got him!" Higgins yelled triumphantly, breaking from his cover and charging forward with his revolver drawn. But Higgins had underestimated the environment, and he had underestimated the black horse. As Higgins ran past Goliath, the massive beast, spooked by the gunfire and fiercely protective of its master, lashed out. A heavy, iron-shod hoof caught Higgins squarely in the chest. The enforcer flew backward with a sickening crunch, landing motionless in the snow. The remaining uninjured thug took one look at Higgins, dropped his rifle, and ran blindly back into the trees, disappearing into the night. Levi Bronson, still sprawled in the snow, scrambled to his feet and followed, slipping and sliding in his desperation to escape. The canyon plunged back into a ringing silence, broken only by the ragged breathing of the horses and the wind. Kaya rushed to Gideon. He was slumped against the tree, his right hand clutching his left shoulder. Dark, hot blood was already soaking through the thick buffalo hide, steaming in the freezing air. "Gideon," Kaya gasped, falling to her knees beside him. She pulled his hand away. The bullet had passed clean through the fleshy part of his shoulder, missing the bone. But it was bleeding heavily. "I'm all right," Gideon rasped, his face pale beneath his weathered tan. He looked at her, his icy blue eyes wide with a mixture of shock and admiration. You didn't run." "I told you," she said, her hands moving quickly to unbuckle her thick leather belt to use as a tourniquet. "I don't leave people behind." With agonizing effort, she helped him back under the overhang. She sparked the fire back to life, desperately needing light to tend to the wound, using snow melted in a tin cup. She cleaned the blood away and bound the shoulder tightly with strips torn from her own cotton undershirt. As she worked, her hands brushing against his skin, the barrier between them shattered. They were no longer bounty hunter and prey. They were two people who had just bled for each other. Gideon winced as she pulled the bandage tight, but he didn't look away from her. "Why did you save me?" "Kaya, I came here to take you in." Kaya sat back on her heels, wiping a smudge of blood and soot from her forehead. "You came here for a job. You stayed to keep me alive. Why didn't you just hand me over to Higgins?" Gideon stared into the flames, the firelight casting a melancholic glow over his scarred features. "Because Cutler didn't just steal horses," he said quietly, his voice heavy with an old, rotting grief. 3 years ago, my younger brother, Thomas, owned a small spread down in the Sweetwater Valley. Cutler wanted the water rights. When Thomas refused to sell, Cutler's men, Higgins and his crew, paid him a visit in the middle of the night. They burned the house down with Thomas and his wife inside, claimed it was a tragic accident. Kaya covered her mouth, her eyes widening. "Gideon, I'm so sorry. I joined the Pinkertons to find proof, to put Cutler away legally." Gideon continued, his jaw tightening. "But Cutler owns the judges. He owns the marshals. The law couldn't touch him. So I quit. I became a bounty hunter to get close to his inner circle. I took this job hoping it would lead me to Higgins." He looked at her, his expression softening. "I didn't expect to find a girl willing to freeze to death to protect her grandfather's legacy." Kaya reached out, her fingers gently tracing the rough scar on his jawline. Gideon leaned into her touch, closing his eyes for a brief moment. The intimacy of the gesture spoke volumes in the desolate, frozen wasteland. "We'll get them to safety," Kaya whispered fiercely, "and then we'll make Cutler pay. Together." Dawn broke over the Wind River Range in a blaze of cold light. The storm gone, but its aftermath untouched snow stretching endlessly in every direction. Beneath the rocky overhang, the fire had dwindled to embers. Gideon forced himself to stand, leaning heavily on Kaya. His shoulder throbbed, but the bleeding had stopped. Red Higgins lay dead in the snow, and the others were gone. They couldn't stay. "We ride," Gideon muttered, unable to lift his arm. Kaya took over without hesitation. She saddled Goliath and helped him mount, her steady confidence cutting through his pain. Choosing another horse, she rode bareback, guiding the rest. "Fort Washakie," she said, pointing north. The journey was brutal. For 2 days, they pushed through deep snow, frozen rivers, and steep terrain. Nights were worse, huddled together beneath a buffalo coat, sharing warmth and the last of their strength. In those quiet hours, they spoke of loss, of home, of who they had been before everything broke. Something changed between them. By the second afternoon, the land opened into the Wind River Basin. Smoke curled into the sky signs of life. As they entered the settlement, people gathered, drawn by the sight of the Appaloosas. Kaya's uncle stepped forward, relief softening his weathered face as she embraced him. That night, with Gideon treated and the horses safe, they stood beneath the open sky. "It's over," Kaya said. Gideon shook his head slightly. "No, it's just starting." He pulled her close, voice quiet but certain. "I'm done chasing ghosts. I want something real." Kaya smiled faintly. For the first time, neither of them felt lost. They had finally found somewhere worth staying. "Thank you for riding along on this wild western journey. If Kaya and Gideon's fight for survival and love in the brutal Wyoming snow captured your heart, please hit that like button and share this tale with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more thrilling, real-life historical dramas, romance, and untamed adventures from the frontier. Saddle up and join our community today.